Hello and a very warm welcome to this In Retail Conversation with. My name is David Roth from WPP, and today I'm in Retail Conversation with Bryan Roberts, who's the Insights Director for Kantar Retail, and the subject of our In Conversation with is Tesco's, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined today by Bryan Roberts. Bryan, a very warm welcome. Bryan, as I said, is the Insights Director for Kantar Retail. And is an analyst and specialist, clearly not only in the retail area, but with Tesco's in particular. We're going to cover quite a lot of ground today, and we want to make it as interactive as possible. So if you have a question, please feel free to ask. Also, if you want to ask your question via Twitter, you can do it via my hashtag, which is David Roth, DAVIDROTH, London. And you could also do it on Bryan's. Oh, actually, I've not certainly got yours on, actually. So maybe you need to do it just on mine. But if you want to follow Bryan as well, yours is Bryan Roberts 72. Okay, great. Now we've got that out of the way. Let's start. It wasn't that long ago where Tesco could do absolutely no wrong. And of course, today that's far from the case. But let's not forget that Tesco is still a massive business, both here in the UK and internationally. And what it does, how it behaves, not only has an impact for Tesco's employees and colleagues around the world, and Tesco's shareholders, but also the entire retail world. And just to give you, I suppose, a little bit of indication of how Tesco's has, I think it's fair to say, reshaped very much the retail landscape around the world. Let's just, before we look at Tesco's today, let's just take a little look back at what Tesco's has delivered to us, I suppose, as those people involved in retailing, but also as consumers. It was many years ago, in fact it was 1919 when Tesco's was founded. It was founded by Jack Cohen, one of the great sort of entrepreneurs of his generation, who came back from the Great War, the war to end all wars. Clearly that hasn't happened, and took his demob money, which was the money given to him by the army in order to start a new life. And he started a market stall in the East End of London. He took £4, which was all the amount of stock that he had for that first day of trading, and he made £1 on it. So, you know, not a bad return on the first day's
pretty good start.
Trading.
Pretty good start, yeah.
Now Tesco's is 12 countries around the world. It was the first sort of company that really understood what supermarkets were all about. It started to sell household goods as well. It really was the company that introduced Green Shield stamps. Many people listening remember Green Shield stamps, but I suppose in essence that was the very first loyalty scheme, or big loyalty scheme. Was again the first sort of a store that embraced the whole sort of supermarket concept as well. Let's just take a look at a very early Tesco's commercial, and this really was launched when Green Shield stamps were on their way out. They decided that that method of rewarding customers for loyalty, it was you got a certain amount of stamps depending on how much you spent, and you could redeem your stamps. In those days, stamps really did mean prizes, didn't they? You could redeem your stamps for a whole variety of things out of a catalogue. Actually, that business ended up being Argos, in a sense, didn't it?
Yeah, it's all very much interlinked.
Yes, but that was stopped, and something that then became very dear to Tesco's heart, and also set the pace of what big box retailing was going to be all about, and they called it checkout. So let's see that first commercial.
Where can you get hundreds of price cuts that help keep the cost of living in check? Check out at Tesco. Check out a 15 3/4 ounce can of Heinz baked beans, 12.5p. A pound of Stork SB margarine, 26.5p. £3 of McDougall's flour, 24.5p. 150-gram carton of ski yogurt, 7.5p. A 200-gram pack of Jacob's cream crackers, 11.5p. A large can of ideal evaporated milk, 15.5p. The pound jars of Chivers jelly marmalade, 19.5p. A litre bottle of Tesco low-calorie drinks, 14.5p. A half pound of Tesco butter, 19.5p. The 6-pack of Penguin biscuits, 19.5p. Check out your local Tesco, because Tesco has price cuts that help keep the cost of living in check.
Well, a couple of things about that. One, there's some amazing brands there, which some are still in existence and some aren't. And the other was, which I've got to say I completely forgotten about, that you could actually buy things with half a p.
Those were the days.
Yeah. Well, clearly Tesco's has changed considerably, and now a big international retailer as well. We're going to talk a little bit of elements of those. 3 profit warnings over the course of the last 12 months. A change in chief executive, that change coming a month earlier than scheduled. Very recently, in the last profit warning, a reduction in shareholders' dividends, which is something very unusual, especially for institutional investors in Tesco's, who've always seen the stock as delivering very good returns in terms of dividends, and a big slash in capital investment. Just as I suppose a holistic perspective, when did the wheels of the trolley start coming off, and what implications are there for that at the moment?
Yeah, I think when we look at the situation that Tesco finds itself in at the moment, there's a number of self-inflicted wounds which it's suffering from. But also, I think it's worth remembering that the environment around Tesco has become incredibly difficult, particularly in the UK. So we've obviously got the rise of the discounters. We've entered an environment where the grocery business has become a zero growth environment. So people are actually, I think for the first time in my career, we're actually seeing volume declines in the British grocery sector, which is unheard of. Huge competition from the likes of Asda as well. Obviously Morrison's, Sainsbury's, and Waitrose at the other end are all applying huge amounts of pressure. So the environment in the UK and also in lots of overseas markets for Tesco has got a lot more difficult. But really, we have to go back to the tail end of the Terry Leahy era, really, to see some of the origins of the current problems, really, which was, an overemphasis really on foreign markets. Obviously, the huge disaster which will live long in the memory was Fresh and Easy in the US. But also, lots of investments in sort of more tertiary areas like financial services and telecoms and all this kind of stuff.
But it's interesting, in a sense, looking back at hindsight of some of that, because in the early 80s, the 90s, and the turn of the century, most observers was looking at what Tesco's were doing. Here's a retailer using their brand, extending the brand franchise across, first of all, different formats. So went from sort of large stores to sort of city stores, smaller stores, sort of hypermarkets as well. Then financial services, using the brand to go onto mobile phones and then international. And I suppose most observers were seeing that as a very positive thing. Tesco increasing its footprint, having, I suppose, a greater share of customers' lives as opposed to being constrained into that sort of supermarket territory. But I mean, maybe there is a lesson for that in that, which is, it's very difficult to spin all those plates all the time, especially when retailing life becomes tough.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value in things like Tesco Bank, for example. It's a very profitable business. It's a natural adjunct to the main supermarket operations. But I think when they started selling carpets and cars and houses and kitchens and bathrooms, online, lots and lots of distracting stuff. What became clear, I think, was that the focus probably wasn't where it should be, which is looking after the UK shop. And it's worth remembering that the reason why Tesco succeeded in the first place, why it overtook Sainsbury's back in the 80s, was a fundamental and laser-guided focus on what was best for the shopper. I think sadly what we started seeing towards the end of the Leahy era, and I think it's worth remembering that and not put all the blame on Phil Clark, because I think he's unfairly been blamed for some of these problems. And he spent most of his time trying to fix some of the issues he inherited. But you know, the focus shifted away from the shopper, to be honest with you, towards the shareholder. So they started running the business incredibly hard in the UK, using the UK business as kind of a cash cow to bankroll non-core activities, and also some of these fairly unwise international adventures in places like the US and Japan and so on, and even China, which in retrospect, you know, was clearly a very underperforming business. So, I'm aware that the tone of a lot of what we talk about today will probably be negative, but I think it's worth remembering. This isn't a business on its knees. It's a very, very good retailer. It's by far and away the market leader in the UK. It's got a great international presence. It's a very exciting growth market. It's more profitable than most of its competitors. It makes £3 billion a year, so it's not on its knees at all. And it's still justifiably is regarded as one of the great innovators in the history of retail. So we look at convenience, we look at online, we look at loyalty, we look at the use of data, use of technology in supply chain. I mean, they're a fantastic business, but a business which sadly has lost its way slightly in the face of an incredibly difficult market situation in the UK and abroad.
Well, let's take a look at one of those innovations, because Tesco really was a trailblazer in the sort of move from supermarkets stocking manufacturers' brands to supermarkets starting to do their own thing in terms of own label, but also trying to do that in a quality way. Let's look at one of the sector leading, and still is, I think, commercials, which starred Dudley Moore, which was really very much the launch of the Tesco's talking about quality products and its own ranges. Let's take a look at commercial number 3.
David, I have an assignment for you. A last chance to make your name at Tesco. I want you to go out and buy some chicken from France. We've heard about a unique breed that lives free range near Bordeaux. Get yourself down there and secure an exclusive deal for us. Oh, and David, don't come back without them.
So, Monsieur Ferraud, your chickens run wild in the forests of Bordeaux, living on corn and maize.
Mais oui.
And this makes them amongst the tastiest free-range chickens in all of France.
Mais oui.
So,
don't come back without them.
Would you be happy to sell them exclusively to us at Tesco?
Mais oui.
Oh! Terrific, terrific.
Il est fou ce temps-là, il m'embrasse maintenant avec him.
Well, might we go and see the little blighters, may we?
Mais oui.
No, may we?
Mais oui.
So they roam wild in these very woods?
Mais oui.
Yeah. Chick, 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 chick. Chick, 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 chick. They are very free range, aren't they?
Mais oui.
Chick, 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 chick.
I think your point, Brian, about let's not get too negative in a sense. This is a big business. It has a huge amount of cash being thrown off. It's got huge reserves, and it has a history of getting things right and investing in things and turning them round. If you were the new chief executive, and in fact, on day one, he asked every single employee in Tesco's to email him, speak to him, send him a message about what they thought he should do. What do you think is the most pressing thing in his inbox at the moment?
I'm going to twist your question and pretend you asked what 3 things are the most pressing. And I spend a lot of time in Tesco stores speaking to a lot of store managers, area managers, and so on, and in the UK. And they're sort of 3 main wishes at the moment. The first one's around price, in terms of getting, not necessarily becoming the lowest price retailer, because I think that's impossible. You can't out Aldi if you like. It's impossible to replicate their business model and deliver those low price points. But I think what both employees and shoppers are craving is just a reduction in the complexity of pricing and what value actually means at Tesco, and certainly a reduction in the number of promotions, which have become incredibly confusing for shoppers, and also very, very costly and complex for the staff to actually put in place. I mean, changing 3,500 price labels every week is a fairly tiresome exercise. The other main aspect, I think, is around people. So one of the ways that they've been looking to prop up profitability in an increasingly difficult market is by taking hours out of the stores and making, in many cases, fewer people work harder or not do as good a job as they would wish on things like replenishment and customer service. So you go to some stores and the standards, the execution is fairly risible. Yes, I think clarity on price is very, very important. Certainly getting people back into the store should be another huge priority. And I think that there's obviously some big issues around what the future of the hypermarkets are as well. But I think certainly the price and people points are going to be the top of his mind at the moment.
Well, let's take price, because what we've seen coming out of the recession, I suppose most markets around Europe are either out of recession or virtually out of recession now. As we went into it, sort of as Lehman sort of hit, price became the #1 issue. But what interesting we've seen is consumers have got slightly more prosperous, slightly more disposable income. We haven't seen them take their focus away from price, have we?
No, we're hearing that from retailers quite consistently. So, among the many comments from both Morrisons and Waitrose as part of their results announcements this morning, is that shoppers, this change in shopper behaviour seems to be permanent. It's not just a knee-jerk temporary reaction to recession. It's actually become a permanent part of shopper behaviour. Is a very firm understanding of what value means to shoppers individually, and I think it's important to remember that price is just one of 3 components of value. The others being quality and service. And Tesco's clearly underperforming on all of those 3 attributes, which come together to make value from each shopper's perspective. So, Aldi and Lidl get away with fairly relaxed levels of service, shall we say, but because they offer such fantastic value and also low prices and also quite decent quality as well. Well, at the other end of the market, Waitrose is kind of demonstrably more expensive, but the quality and the service really make up for that, and that's why it's been, until fairly recently, running away with growth from among the traditional supermarkets. So,
what does that say? That sort of 3-way sort of segmentation for the strategies of retailers in general, in terms of you've got the value players in one part of the marketplace, you've got the I suppose the quality players, or players who are looking at other dimensions, and then you've got this massive sort of middle ground that in a lot of markets is under tremendous pressure. Is there a place for a middle ground retailer anymore?
I think there is, but I think there has to be a clarity about what that particular retailer is offering shoppers. So with Asda, you get it. It's all about price. Obviously a broad range, but it's all about price. It's about reliably low prices, so it's not that incredibly complex high-low promotional mechanics. There's no loyalty cards, because at the moment with Tesco there's so many hoops you have to jump through to generate maximum value for money that it actually become quite tiresome for shoppers. And I think it's worth remembering that one of the reasons Aldi is winning is not just because it's cheap, but also because it's easy. So, do shoppers necessarily want to wade through 450 different types of air freshener in a big store? Probably not. But I think having a clarity of proposition, and I think we saw in the advert we just showed earlier, is that back in the 80s, 90s, it was very clear what Tesco stood for. There was a very clear proposition on price, proposition on quality, proposition on service, but it really has lost its way. And all of certainly with most of the other food retailers in the UK at the moment, shoppers get what they're about. They are about quality or they are about low prices, and Tesco's really just sat in the middle, flip-flopping between those 2 extremes.
Clearly Tesco's was one of the first retailers to land bank and then to roll out big stores. In fact, one of the reasons why Tesco's market share grew so fast and overtook Sainsbury's was the fact that Sainsbury's were very, very slow into large format stores. You know, everything is cyclical, I suppose, and in retailing it's more cyclical than most industries. And we're now almost the reverse of that, which is large stores are bad and small stores are exceptionally good. How does a retailer like Tesco's and also, you know, other retailers that are now struggling with the relevance of very large stores, what do you put in it, how do you make the economics work? What are the issues around those at the moment? And that relationship between the small stores and large stores?
Yeah, I think when we look across, you know, global retailing or perhaps European retailing with more of a focus, we know that some hypermarkets are still growing pretty strongly. But those that are, like Leclerc in France or Kaufland in Central and Eastern Europe, they are EDLP retailers with a fairly limited non-food range. So we've got, you know, non-food, a lot of those categories are, you know, literally disappearing, like entertainment is obviously transitioning towards digital consumption and digital purchase.
And of course those product categories were great footfall generating
and also
categories.
I mean non-food generally having higher margins than grocery enabled, you know, Asda and Tesco to virtually cross-subsidise their food prices through the margin they were generating in general merchandise. But so I don't think that the format is redundant, but I think it does need to be quite seriously rethought, and both Carrefour and Tesco have obviously had different attempts at doing that. So Carrefour had the much vaunted Carrefour Planet concept, which has since died a death, and you know, despite the very attractive bells and whistles we get in places like Tesco Watford, for example, I mean the sales uplifts that those stores generated initially were very, very impressive, but what we've seen is those sales uplifts gradually dissipate. I think, you know, from the shopper perspective, when we go on a shopping trip, we are investing three things, which is sort of time, money and kind of emotional investment, and the hypermarket obviously takes a lot of time to either get to and also navigate. Prices aren't necessarily as keen as you'll find in a smaller discount store, and the emotional investment you have to put into choosing between 38 different types of ketchup is, you know, shoppers don't necessarily want that degree of complexity anymore. Yeah, again, Aldi, what, 2 SKUs of ketchup seems to be doing very well. So I think, yeah, Tesco, certainly the improvements that Phil Clark put in place into some of the refurbished Tesco stores, be that Watford or West Bromwich, or, you know, lots of nice examples. Purley's another nice example. There's a lot of great ideas there, there's a lot of really nice propositions, but there's not enough people in the stores to make sure the standards are where they should be. So you can have all the nice coffee shops you want around a hypermarket, but if you haven't got appropriate standards of availability or cleanliness or execution, it's not going to work. So I think, you know, that is why getting people back into the stores, or getting hours back into the stores, is going to be a huge priority for Dave Lewis. And what we've heard from within Tesco is it seems like those restrictions on overtime and payroll are being lifted as we head into Christmas. Obviously take time to filter through in terms of, you know, shoppers flooding back to Tesco, but I'm sure it will help in the longer term.
We've seen in some of Tesco's strategic documents and the way in which they're looking at their estate, cutting some of the square footage out of some of the stores, resizing them. What do retailers now do with excess space?
Well, I think, you know, over time we're going to see sort of some of the hypermarkets gradually morph into department stores in essence, and, you know, Carrefour in Greece is a good example where it's given over the running of its electronics departments to the local part of the Dixon's retail business there. You know, we're starting to see some of it in Tesco where they're passing some bits over to, I think, Sports Direct in one store. They've chopped one store often given one part to a gym as well. And I think that what we might start seeing in future as well is kind of the stores being downsized and the excess space being used as dark stores to satisfy some of the home shopping and click and collect requirements as well. But, you know, there's no doubt that a lot of the non-food categories will have to be savagely cut back. And there's only so much space you can fill up with clothing. So, you know, again, they've had lots of good ideas, getting more food service in there, getting the improved homewares departments in there as well. But yeah, the stark fact is that unless you have an amazing clothing range, such as George at Asda, which is a huge footfall driver, you know, a great brand in its own right. I mean, F&F is improving, don't get me wrong, but it's by no means a George yet. So without that sort of killer clothing collection, then trying to get people to schlep around the non-food part of the store is often quite a challenge.
Well, I mean, most grocers have really struggled with doing clothing well. I mean, Tesco's clearly struggling with it. Sainsbury's have never made clothing work particularly well. It's actually very difficult to do with the mentality of a grocery retailer in a sense. And George is the exception, but in a sense they brought in a fashion entrepreneur in order to create and gave him pretty carte blanche to do what he wanted to do.
Yeah, I think that F&F has improved significantly, both in terms of range and also the kit they're using in store to merchandise it. So, you go to any sort of recently refurbished store like Slough is a good example. Then the clothing department is absolutely bang on, and Sainsbury's is also improving with the two range. That's again coming on leaps and bounds. But you look at categories like home entertainment, like media, lots of this stuff. There's just too much space given over to that, and I think Asda has addressed that in some of its larger stores like Milton Keynes by getting Disney in to run a Disney store concession, which is a great footfall driver. It increases dwell time and it gets the kids off your back when you're trying to buy some tins of beans. So it's everyone's a winner, frankly.
Well, if you haven't been to a Tesco store in Watford, I mean that's a really good store to have a look. See some of the great innovations that Tesco are trialling and experimenting, and for a whole series of reasons, it seems to be that Watford is the store that Tesco's choose in order to trial things out. So it's definitely worth a visit. Let's look international. I mean, Tesco's were very much the first retailer to think that actually it's possible to go international. Before that, most retailers, with the exception of Carrefour, most retailers thought that being local was the thing to do. Great sort of investments. Eastern Europe probably being the first, as Eastern Europe started to develop. They went in and bought quite a lot of the early entrepreneurial food and clothing companies and hypermarkets. Of course, big moves into Asia. China being a really good example. Let's take a look at video number 7 and just take a look at the Tesco store in Dalian in China. Well, a typical example of, I suppose, Tesco stores out of the UK. For a while, those stores did exceptionally well, and it's clearly eaten up a lot of capital. What do you think the issues are for some of those stores? We'll talk about America in a second. That's a
whole different story,
different ballpark. What's your perspective?
Well, I think again, it's worth reminding ourselves that most of these are profitable markets for Tesco and very, very impressive. They have very impressive capabilities across different formats, across different channels. Again, pioneers in loyalty marketing, pioneers in online grocery, and also a very credible presence in convenience retailing in a number of these countries as well. That said, I mean, none of these so-called emerging markets were immune to the recession, so there has been a lot of trading down. A lot of the markets, so Ireland, Poland and Turkey in particular, are being equally savaged by discounters as Tesco is in the UK. So in Turkey, BIM is an incredibly good discounter, Biedronka in Poland, having a huge impact on all of the supermarkets, but again Tesco's feeling the pinch there. So yeah, we've got general economic pressures, we've got pressure from discounters, and also again, so-called emerging markets have probably grown up, and it's worth remembering that markets like Poland, like the Czech Republic, like Hungary, Slovakia, incredibly saturated, competitive markets, and there's, it's not an easy. None of these are easy markets to be in. They're hugely competitive.
Well, I think Poland for quite some time was the most competitive market, with pretty much every major supermarket player around the globe in most of the big towns slugging it out against each other.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. And I think again, a lot of these changes in shopper behaviour are as applicable in some of these international markets as they are in the UK. And certainly in Asia, you've still got a very strong attachment to wet markets and other traditional forms of retail as well. But I think they've got rid of all of the businesses they need to get rid of. They've done a very elegant sort of semi-exit from the Chinese market through that joint venture. And the next one, the only one that still looks a bit vulnerable is Turkey, but which they've tried to offload but couldn't find a buyer. But I think the international part of the business should be retained. There's lots and lots of nonsense in the press at the moment about them ditching international, ditching Clubcard. But I think they're both two inherently successful parts of the business and should be retained. Probably the possible exception of Turkey, but
it is difficult to get international synergies. I mean, the allure of international synergies when Tesco's went international, when many other operators went international, was massive. But I think everybody has actually found that generating those synergies and delivering them is much more difficult than it first seems.
Yeah, I think obviously 20 years ago these were high growth markets with a bit more room in them than obviously the fiercely competitive UK and Ireland market, but they've ceased being high growth markets. They are very competitive. And also as well, you mentioned synergies, and Tesco has some great synergies in terms of private label sourcing, in terms of the back office stuff like IT and supply chain. But the whole sort of globalisation of retailing back in the 90s was powered by this sort of nebulous concept of greater buying power. And simply put, that doesn't exist. Buying is still a national game. And for example, suppliers in the UK don't necessarily care that Asda is part of the biggest retailer on earth. They care more about the fact that Asda is half the size of Tesco. So we wonder who gets the best prices there. So yes, I think the whole concept of global buying power was nonsense from the start. But that seemed to be justifying a lot of this flag planting we saw from Tesco, from our whole Delays, Carrefour. And it's worth remembering that this isn't just happening to Tesco. Carrefour has exited about 8 markets in recent years. A lot of rationalisation from Delays, from our hold as well. So yeah, I don't think globalisation was all it was cracked up to be honest, certainly in grocery retail at any rate.
Well, you're watching In Retail Conversation with David Roth from WPP, and I'm today with Bryan Roberts, the Insight Director for Kantar Retail, and we are discussing Tesco's. Bryan, one of the things that Tesco's took a massive bet on, both, I suppose, capital with a financial perspective on it, capital in terms of their reputation with the investor community, was America, in a sense the biggest consumer market in the grocery sector, with Fresh and Easy. They spent many years researching the concept and then executed it, and it didn't really work from day one, did it?
No. I have quite a sort of conflicted point of view about Fresh and Easy, because on the one hand it was a brilliant store concept which would have absolutely flown in the UK. I think it would have been a huge success in the UK. Failed in America for a number of reasons. Firstly, Arizona and California were two of the hardest hit states after the financial crisis.
Yes, timing is everything, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, it's much better to be lucky than to be good in some respects.
Yeah, so there was a bit of slight misfortune there with that sort of huge turbulence which really impacted the very same two states that Tesco decided to to enter. But then there were some fundamental flaws in terms of store location. So it's effectively putting stores on the wrong side of the road, which I know sounds a bit flippant, but having that, that being on sort of the key junctions off roads is something that Walgreens has mastered over the years in the States, and it's very, very important. Also, perhaps overdoing things slightly in terms of, perhaps underestimating how attached Americans are to loose produce rather than the more efficient Tesco version of pre-packed produce. Perhaps overestimating how much Americans would go for private brands, because it's quite a low private label penetration in the US market compared to the UK.
And of course, 99% of the SKUs in a Fresh and Easy to start off with were private label, which is a massive investment to start with.
Yeah, and also as well, there was an almost virtual absence of marketing. So I was speaking to folk in Phoenix, Arizona, who genuinely had never heard of this new grocery chain in their midst, and they also didn't launch a loyalty scheme or have couponing and that kind of thing, which again is inherent to the American way of doing things. So yeah, I think we can look back in hindsight and say unlucky in timing and a few flaws, genuine flaws in the business, but. Yeah, what I was initially quite optimistic about, I think with scale, could have actually been a successful business. And we're talking about a business which had the supply chain capability to service thousands of stores that ended up servicing a couple of hundred. So it's no wonder they decided to try and get rid of it. As it's cost Tesco, what, 2-3 billion quid in total. So it's a very, very expensive and humbling misadventure, but worth remembering that Walmart has had its fair share of those as well. Walmart Germany, Walmart Korea, Walmart Indonesia. Lots and lots of, no one has an unblemished track record in international, put it that way.
And hopefully that's a £2 billion learning experience as opposed to a £2 billion burn in a sense. It's impossible these days to be a retailer without having a strong e-commerce business. How would you rate Tesco's current e-commerce business, and where do you think it needs to go?
Well, I think this is still one of the areas where Tesco is a genuine leader. I think in very general terms, it's rolled out e-commerce to virtually all of its international markets. It's also rolling out very aggressively click and collect as well, which we perceive as being the genuine future of online grocery, as home delivery is very, very expensive for the retailer and profoundly inconvenient for the shopper when you think about it.
Well, I think there's nothing more inconvenient and stress-inducing when you get home and you see a little slip of paper on the doormat or in the letterbox saying, "We tried to deliver your package, you weren't there," and you're in another endless loop of ringing people, trying to find another time for them to come round, or even for them to locate your package.
Very much so. So I think click and collect's the way forward, and importantly, they're one of very few profitable online grocers that we are aware of globally. So there's lots of people are doing this, lots of people losing a significant amount of money. So Tesco is the largest online grocer globally. Probably, it depends on your definition of grocery, but Amazon might be catching up. And it is profitable, and it has led the way in a great number of innovations in terms of e-commerce. I think really we've seen the likes. Obviously, Ocado is a great operator, but still to make any money. Asda says it is profitable, and arguably has stolen the march on Tesco in terms of click and collect and that kind of thing. But it's still a great player within that space. Although we often have discussions with suppliers who would suggest that there's some long overdue investment required into the systems behind Tesco.com, and also some substantial improvements that could be possible in terms of online merchandising and so on. And perhaps Ocado's doing a better job there. But by and large, it's one of the few parts of the business where you have to say, hats off, you've done a great job. And I think it will continue to be an increasingly important part of the Tesco empire.
Well, we've had a question from Maroon, who is in Portland, and he's asked, how can technology now help retailers, not just Tesco, but retailers generally, overperform and help the customer?
Yeah, I think it's about making customers' lives easier. So again, Tesco's had some great pilots of automated checkouts and the tunnel scanners, all this kind of thing. It's it's put into some stores some great tech in that regard. They've also attempted to use technology to sort of try and bring together the online and bricks and mortar worlds with touchscreen kiosks for the non-food side of the business. In Watford there was an initial trial with giant screens for the toy category, for example, that you could use. But I think if you can make consumers' lives quicker, easier, or actually more entertaining, and actually help make the shopping trip enjoyable, because it's often easy for us to forget that grocery shopping can actually be a fun and experiential journey, if you like. And I think technology can be used to inform, to entertain, and to expedite a shopping trip. And I think Tesco, like many retailers, has done a lot of that. In terms of checkout, for example. But then there's always the suspicion at the back of one's mind that may be more about cost reduction than it is about actually providing a superior service to shoppers. So I'll leave that as an open remark, and I'll let shoppers make up their own minds on that.
Well, talking about checkouts, maybe it's a good time just to look at our final commercial from Tesco's, commercial number 5.
Sorry. What the? Bjorn? Thank you.
Next customer, please.
I got it. I'm first.
Can I help you, sir?
Yeah, I need cornflakes.
This way.
At Tesco, we understand that you want to get your shopping done as quickly as possible. So if there's ever more than one person in front of you at the checkout, we'll do our best to open another one.
Let me open this other till for you, sir.
One in front at Tesco. Every little helps.
Get out of here, man.
Well, I think that commercial really illustrates what made Tesco's so good in a sense, and it was a great understanding of what matters to consumers and really having their finger on the pulse of understanding consumers' wants, needs and desires, and changing very rapidly to do that. You mentioned a little bit earlier that that I suppose listening antennae was not as good as it should be, or certainly not as good as it was in the past. In terms of what Tesco's needs to do in order to be more in tune with what its shoppers want and to an extent what its employees want, what needs to be done now?
Well, I think one of the key problems really is that, in order to hit its financial KPIs, which Tesco as a listed business obviously has a duty to shareholders to maximise returns to those shareholders. And that's led to some very unwelcome behaviours from Tesco as a retailer. So you get the sense walking stores that a lot of what's going on in that store isn't about selling, it's about extracting money from suppliers. So there's too many products, there's too many promotions, there's too much branded activity in stores which has no benefit to the shopper. So you get the sense that the business is being run by buyers rather than by merchandisers at the moment, which is never a happy place for the business or for shoppers to be in.
And that's strange in a sense because Tesco's was founded. I mean, Jack Cohen was a most amazing merchant, a great retailer, and understood his customers exceptionally well. McLaren exactly the same. Marketing was always at the centre of Tesco's, even before I suppose that the phrase marketing was used from a retail perspective. It seems like the centre of gravity in Tesco's has moved over the course of the last few years much more towards a buying-centric organisation as opposed to a marketing-centric organisation.
Yeah, I think Tesco's by no means unique in being a business that's sort of shifted from being a company that makes money when it's selling to making money when it's buying. And I think that's an unfortunate symptom of the way the industry works to some extent. But I think there has been a disconnect, certainly in the UK, between management and the shop floor. You get the sense that there weren't enough enough time wasn't being spent by head office in unannounced store visits. It's very, very easy, and a lot of supermarkets do this, to run a series of planned store visits where stores are given the opportunity to sort of get themselves clean and tidy and full and fresh before management turn up. And I think, you know,
surely that never happens.
I don't know. It's hard to believe. But you know, they're simply not getting the basics of retailing right. So you can go to a store at 8 in the morning and it'll be beautiful, and produce will be, you know, very, very, very full. But you go in at 8 o'clock and there's gaps all over the place. And I mean, one of my favourite activities, which is going to make me sound even more tragic than you thought possible, but you know, the ambient clearance section is a real window into the soul of every store.
Many a tweet of yours from the ambient clearance section.
Yeah, I mean, if that's an absolute war zone, what that tells you is that store managers aren't walking the store enough, that there's not a basic pride in the standards in the store. And I think, you know, you go into a very well-run store, you know, availability will be as good as it can be. You know, everything will be faced up perfectly. The clearance area will be well labelled, well organised, and there to actually clear stock very, very quickly. But I mean, some of the standards you encounter in Tesco stores at the moment are just unbelievably poor. And certainly when you've got companies like Asda who have done a great job on availability, they do a great job on in-store standards and execution. You know, then it's no wonder really that if Tesco starts looking worse than Aldi and Lidl in terms of standards, then it's no wonder shoppers are jumping ship and going to those retailers where they get the added benefit of much lower prices. So yeah, Tesco needs to take a long, hard look at what's going on in its stores, and that needs to start from the top of the business. And you know, we've heard, we've seen Dave Lewis has already been spending time in stores, but he needs to do that not just in the very good London stores, but get up to Scotland, get down to Cornwall and see, you know, really hit, you know, the grassroots of the business, and make sure that's unannounced, because it's very, again, it is very easy to see what you want to see if you're a senior manager within a retail business.
Well, if you're interested in the ambient parts of stores, you'll probably be interested in this book, which is a book that we've written on the history of retail in 100 objects, and Brian's also contributed to some of this as well. And we're giving away 5 copies of this book. If you want a copy, all you need to do is tweet to me, David Roth, D-A-V-I-D-R-O-T-H, London, and if you just say, I want a copy of the book, we'll randomly select a few people, 5 people, in order to get that, and we'll send that over to you. There used to be, in a sense, pretty much an umbilical cord between the shopper and Tesco, and I would say that umbilical cord has been cut in several places. What's the secret recipe to put it all back together again?
Well, again, that's what's been so bemusing really about calls, largely from journalists that say Clubcard should be axed, because I think Clubcard and the dunnhumby data that it generates is one of the very bedrocks of Tesco's success. And I think when we're seeing it being used sensibly, as we have been seeing in London stores, where they're really tailoring the range to meet local demographic needs of the catchment area, and that's why some of the London stores are absolutely flying. Again, we mentioned that a Tesco Watford is worth a visit, but I'd totally suggest that going to Tesco Metro in Upton Park is equally worthwhile, because it is an amazing store, which, you know, it isn't beautiful like Tesco Metro in Tooley Street or you know, other nice, pretty stores. It's, you know, there to cater for the local community, which is largely made up of, you know, Asian population, Afro-Caribbean population as well, and it's just brilliantly ranged and merchandised to hit all of those target shoppers. And that's one of the reasons behind that is dunnhumby. So I think if you start using Clubcard data and dunnhumby data as a way of improving the range and improving the service for shoppers, then that's a very good way of doing it. If you're using it as a profit centre to get even more money out of suppliers through range reviews or just simply selling them category data, then that's probably not what it was made for. So I think, yeah, that's essential. And I also think it's about re-empowering store managers to run their stores as they see fit, not to a spreadsheet, which really has been happening.
It's a very, very difficult balance, this sort of, you know, command and control, on the one hand, and letting the stores and the store managers, who clearly are the people who are the most closest to the customers, do their own thing on another. And we see it in lots of different retailers, this sort of swing from everything the store needs to do is fine versus, you know, in everything that the head office dictates is what needs to happen. I mean, it's difficult for a retailer to get that balance right, because neither of those are correct for a retailer that has immense scale, are they?
Yeah, and I think we've seen some encouraging signs from that, from Tesco, you know, in that area in the last few months, and I think it's very interesting to see that both Walmart in the US and Carrefour in France have gone back from and kind of over-centralised way of running the business, and they've returned autonomy to regional managers and to store managers to promote, to trade, even to price as they see fit. And I think has been encouraging from Tesco recently is they've got rid of the somewhat silly notion that you should run a business based on format or channel. So they had, you know, guys running big stores, they had guys running small stores, but now they've, you know, finally realised is that a hypermarket shopper, you know, a Tesco Extra shopper and a Tesco Express shopper in Bradford have more in common than a Tesco Express shopper in Scotland and a Tesco Express shopper in Essex, for example. So returning to a more regionalised way of thinking, I think is very, very important, because there are huge disparities, you know, even within half a mile in London, for example, you know, within 15 miles in other parts of the country. So returning to, yeah, re-empowering store managers and thinking more along geographic than format lines is going to be, you know, yield dividends in the medium term. So we're hearing some positive noises from within Tesco about what's going on, even in the very, very early days of Dave Lewis's regime. So you know, it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think that's one fairly obvious point to make. But you know, if anyone is capable of engineering a massive turnaround, then it has to be Tesco, and I think we'll start seeing them in 2015, because, you know, Christmas is already done in terms of trading and merchandising and planning. But 2015, Q1, Q2, we're going to start seeing the first, you know, genuine shifts in Tesco strategy, be that on pricing, be it on marketing, be it on ranging, service, you know, all these different types of things. But there's no doubt in my mind that 2015 could be among the most interesting in grocery retail's history in the UK. And
given that Tesco's has an amazing influence not just on Tesco's suppliers but the retail industry in general, what impact do you think the next 12 months, Dave Lewis's tenure at Tesco's, its relationships with its suppliers, what it needs to do in order to rebalance the business and grow it, start to grow it again, is going to have in the wider retail industry in the UK and overseas?
Yeah, I think we're definitely going to see a range rationalisation process. You know, Tesco sells too many things, and you don't need all of those variants and pack sizes. You know, air care is a great example. Even soft drinks, you know, you do not need that many different types of Coke. You know, regular Coca-Cola. You don't need all of these different formats.
But in a sense, you know, you do, if, coming back to your earlier point, you're making money out of buying as opposed to making money out of selling.
Well, yeah, again, so having 19 different SKUs in each category makes sense if you are more concerned about your margin than you are about your shopper. So I think what Dave Lewis will do, he gets shoppers. You know, he spent an entire career understanding shoppers and consumers on behalf of Unilever, and I think he gets.
Well, he was range proliferating at Unilever, so
different objectives
to buy more shelf space. So it's a real poacher turned gamekeeper, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously different objectives as a supplier. So I think we'll see the ranges get smaller. We will inevitably see some action on pricing.
And when you say we see ranges getting smaller, that's going to have an impact on ranges not just in Tesco, but all the ranges in all supermarkets around the world, in a sense, as the manufacturers also, in response to their biggest or second biggest customers, curtail their ranges and their products. We've, you know, begun to see that in terms of both P&G and Unilever.
Yeah, I think, you know, that there is a big knock-on impact, and we've seen a lot of the big branded manufacturers really go through their own rationalisation processes in recent years. So, you know, we've heard recently from P&G they want to really slash back the number of brands that they produce, and I think there is that very real sense among all suppliers that they need to have fewer but bigger bets on these these $1 billion or $2 billion brands. And I think retailers are aware as well that by having so many products, with all the way through the value chain, does create inefficiency, does create complexity. And again, coming back to Aldi, the reason why it's so successful is it just carries fewer items, and that makes for much greater efficiency, and also for a less stressful shopping experience as well.
Well, that's almost finished in a sense where we started. Tesco having slashed its capital expenditure, having significantly reduced its profits being sent back to shareholders, now has an immense war chest, and clearly a lot of that war chest is going to be invested in price. So what do you think that impact that is going to have on retail in general?
Yeah, I think that we've seen globally, in lots of the major markets, we've seen the successful retailers are ones that have an EDLP or a near EDLP approach. So, Asda is allegedly an EDLP player, but clearly has promotions. But what those promotions are shallower and longer. And what that means from the shopper point of view is that the overall basket, it's more transparent and predictable in terms of what you're going to spend. You don't need to be quite so vigilant about hoovering up all of the special offers and that kind of thing. And from the Asda's point of view, it obviously means that they're a lot more efficient and availability is a lot better, because you aren't getting all of the end caps, which are, buy one get one free, absolutely bombed out every day. There's more of a sort of predictable and a greater visibility into the supply chain as well. So what we expect to see from Tesco in terms of pricing is certainly fewer promotions, a rebasing of pricing on some of those key items, the ones. So a bit of trying to beat the discounters at their own game, particularly in produce. I think could be quite a battleground next year. And it's interesting that Aldi just comes back with further price reductions when Tesco has been trying to do that. But I think it's going to be about making the entire shopping process simpler for shoppers, more reliable, less complex, a lot easier to navigate in terms of promotional mechanics, as well as in terms of really getting rid of the peripheral ranges in store, which aren't all they're doing is really adding complexity for the shopper, but lining Tesco's pockets in terms of listing fees, slotting fees, and promotional investment.
Well, clearly, as prices start to come down, it's going to be good not only for Tesco's, but it's also going to be very good for consumers. Well, I can see the grim reaper of time knocking on the door. We've come up to our hour. If you want to know more about Tesco's, Bryan and the Kantar Retail team are running a day's workshop, a masterclass in Tesco's. If you want to say a few words about it, Bryan.
Yeah, so this is our regular annual look at Tesco. We normally have, say, 20 to 30 branded suppliers in the room, obviously keen to learn more about Tesco, not just in the UK but also internationally. And we'll be delighted to obviously see as many folk from fellow WPP companies as well. There is a very lavish discount available to sister companies to come along.
Tesco's price reductions having impact even on you?
Well, yeah, we try to be an EDLP player, and we're underlining those credentials once again.
Good. Well, if you go to the Kantar Retail website, you can get the details of that. Well, Bryan, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you very much for watching In Retail Conversation With. If you want a copy of the History of Retail in 100 Objects book, just send me a tweet at David Roth London. And thank you very much indeed for watching.